Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know this is a little different background. I'm not being held hostage anywhere. I'm actually on the 9th floor of the City County building where we're doing this webinar today on the city's annual financial report. I did want to, last year when we did this for the first time as a remote Zoom kind of press conference, I wouldn't have thought that a year later we'd have to do it again. But such is the nature of what has been a very challenging year, and a challenging year for the city as well, and a challenging year for us in the Controller's Office. Obviously, the pandemic created major disruption in our lives, in our economy, and clearly to city finances as well. And the report today will show that. It also, it was also a challenging report for us in the City Controller's Office. As most of you know, we had some significant personnel changes through this period of time. I'm glad that Rachel Heisler is joining me today, who is the new Deputy Controller, and we're still able to work with our friend Doug Anderson over in the Finance Department to produce this report. But also through the year, we lost our Chief Accounting Officer, Hadiza Buhari, moved on to a new position. So I'm giving special credit this year and thank you this year to the staff of our accounting department, Kim McGann, Vicki Clark, Frank Thurner, Sarah Simmers, Tamika Phillips, Rhonda Rawlings, and Liz Dilley, all of whom really contributed a lot to this report in difficult circumstances, right? We're working from home. They didn't have a supervisor, but with the help of Rachel and these fine folks, we were able to produce this report, again, with the help of the folks at Mara Dussel, who do a great job with us on this report every year as our independent auditors, and also the departments in the city and the component units who, again, working from home. We're always worried that we're not going to get the information we need on time, but here we are. We always try to get this out before May 1st, and we were able to do that again this year. So we certainly thank all those folks for that. This year is a challenging year, and we can start with where we normally start, with where our money comes from, and that's really where we took our hit. As you can see, this is a familiar chart, but the numbers may be a little different this year, right? Because you see that parking tax is a much smaller percentage of what we would normally have, as well as amusement tax. I say this every year, but this year it's even more critically true, that the burden of this government rests heavily, too heavily, frankly, on the people who live here. Right? Most of what we do because of the people who live here, own property here, and that is the revenue that we get. And you can see that on this chart. And despite a big announcement made yesterday, that's not going to change, right? That burden is going to stay pretty much the same because, we continue to not receive any real dollars to the city budget from our large nonprofits, our largest employers. So from what I understand from yesterday's announcement, we're not going to see any new revenue to the city as a result of the mayor's announcement and his deal with the large nonprofit employers. But that's where you can see where our money comes from. Again, we'll get more detail on some of these categories, and then you can see also where our money goes. This is something that we talk about every year. Everyone knows that most of our budget, or more than half of our budget, goes to public safety. Our primary job is to protect people, keep people safe, and so you can see that in these numbers as to where our money goes. I would say that when you think about public safety, it's paramedics, and who delivers customers to our large hospitals every day? That's paramedics. So I'm going to continue to talk about the need for our large nonprofits to make direct contributions to the city itself as we move forward. But you can see that's where our money goes, and I think that tells a similar story to what we have normally years, even if the numbers are slightly different. But let's get into the performance, and we can start with the fund balance. And this is probably where you see the big impact where we started 2019 with $133 million in the fund balance, or what we call the rainy day fund, and that has been significantly depleted through 2020 and continuing now into 2021 because of the drop in revenue. We're seeing those funds depleted at a significant rate. Now, 133 down to 85. Some people would look at a city with 85 million and think, boy, things are really great for that city. And the truth is, we were doing really great. We were doing really good things financially in this city. But this drop probably doesn't capture the full picture of the significance of this economic impact. When you figure that in most of the last few years, we've generated significant surpluses, right? Where we didn't do that this year. We had a deficit this year. So while $48 million difference is significant, our real cost, our real loss is more significant than that. And I just say that to point to the need, and the need that now has been met or will be met by increased federal funding to help us with the costs that we have. I'm going to go in a little bit into some of the specific tax categories that we do every year, and let's start with the earned income tax. Obviously, this is our second biggest tax category after real estate, and you can see we had a little dip this year compared to last year, but it's also true that we outperformed budget. So we actually did better in this tax category than we thought we would do. And when you think about what was going on in the pandemic, clearly there was a lot of job loss. But it's also true that here in the city of Pittsburgh, most of our major employers were not laying off employees. And many of our employers were requiring increased hours from their employees. So the fact that earned income tax did not take a particularly hard hit is not too surprising, and it's a credit to the diverse economy that we have here in the city that we were actually able to outperform the budget projection in that tax category. The next one I'll talk about is local services tax, which we talk about this every year, and I like to talk about it. This is the $52 tax. This is the tax that you pay if you have a job in the city of Pittsburgh. $52 is taken out of your pay. On an annual basis. It's basically $1 a week. Now you can see we've had a significant drop in that revenue this year compared to what was fairly a pretty even an amount over the last 10 years. We see a drop this year. Again, we know that the pandemic caused job loss. It may not have caused income loss overall, but it definitely created some job loss. I think a lot of this is driven by the fact that we didn't have college kids here for a lot of the year. So college kids who were taking on part-time jobs also pay that $52 tax once they reach a certain level. So, I think a lot of that is driven by that. And plus just the loss in jobs that we've seen significantly in the hospitality industry, in the retail industry, show that impact. So, that's one of the areas where we have concern. We're hoping that as the pandemic eases, that we'll see some increase there. Let me talk a little bit about some good news, which is pension. 10 years ago, we created this model where we were going to use parking revenue to help fund the pension plan. Back then, some people thought it was a ploy. There were a lot, maybe even some less kind words were thrown at it, but it was an idea that I developed with City Council to help stave off a state takeover. And you can see what's happened, the benefit of it. Now we are committing $26 million a year in pension or in parking tax revenue to the pension fund. And between that and what's been a very strong market, you can see the growth that we have now in the pension fund. This is a look at the invested portfolio only. This does not count the value of the parking asset. And in the invested portfolio, which is real hard assets, we're at almost $600 million. We have never had that kind of money in our pension fund, and we certainly are still unfunded. We still have significant liability, but for the first time, I think we're able to look and see that we're able to get to a position where we are closer to fully funded. And we haven't had that in the past, and it's a credit to city, to the leadership of the city and council and the mayor's office that they have made this commitment and continue to see great results from it. Next, let me talk about the debt. Our debt increased over the last 2 years. Anyone who's followed city finance for a long time knows that we had a very significant debt service and long bonded debt. That debt service a lot resolved over the last few years, and we've been able to have a more manageable debt profile. We have refinanced and borrowed new money both in 2019 and in 2020, so you do see an increase in our total debt, but we're now at a level where our debt is manageable. It's a manageable debt service payment. It's a manageable debt total. And so as we continue, this year we did refinance to realize some savings. But as we continue out, we're going to have a debt profile that is commensurate with what our budget should be, but still enables us to address a lot of what I call the infrastructure deficit that we have here in Pittsburgh. And I think anyone who drives around Pittsburgh sees the concerns that we have about infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, sidewalks, staircases, retaining walls, storm sewers, all these things that we have to fund and make this city better. So that's the picture of our debt service. And let me talk a little bit about the concerns that we have and the specific pandemic-related revenue problems that we've had. First, in parking, obvious that without people commuting into town as much, without special events, we've seen a massive drop, almost a 50% drop in parking tax revenues. This is a very big revenue source for the city of Pittsburgh, and to take a hit like that is something that would require help and does require help from the federal government, and we're thankful that we are going to be receiving that help. But you can see that is just a huge drop. And again, as I mentioned, the parking tax, and I'll talk about the amusement tax in a minute, these are two taxes that are significantly paid by non-city residents. So in this year, where, and every year we always say that the burden is on city residents, in this year it's even more so because we didn't have these revenue sources that are paid significantly by non-city residents. And so that's parking. You can see dropping from near 60 million, over $60 million to almost down to 30 million, almost a 50% cut there. Amusement tax, similarly. Amusement tax is it's not one of our largest tax sources, but it's certainly a significant source of revenue for us. And you can see the plummet in revenues that we got in 2020 from 2019 in amusement taxes. And I'll go a little deeper on that and just a little discussion on that with the next slide. Just taking a look at what happens in a typical year at Heinz Field. At Heinz Field in the 2019-2020 season, the football season, and their concerts, you see 10 Steeler games, 7 Pitt Panther games, and 1 major concert. And the number of people that brings into our city for events, and just the direct revenue in amusement tax alone, $3.8 million in amusement tax alone, and in the following season, $151,000. So it's obviously the pandemic has had a major impact on special events, and special events are key to our city and key to our financial health. Just one other thing that I want to mention, and I'll take questions after this. Deed transfer tax. We saw a significant increase in deed transfer tax in 2020 over 2019, and 2019 was a record year for the deed transfer tax revenue. That points to a very healthy real estate market in Pittsburgh. The fact that we're seeing that kind of transfer of properties throughout the city is an interesting sign. And the question that I think it raises is, what does that mean for the real estate tax itself? Because the future of the real estate tax, a lot of people are concerned. What's the pandemic mean to downtown buildings? What's the work environment? How does it change the culture of our city? without having so many people work downtown. It's clearly had an impact on our downtown merchants. And moving forward, will workers return to downtown to the same level that they were before? Will it be less? And if so, does that then have a negative impact on the value of downtown buildings and buildings around the rest of the city? What we've seen so far, at least with respect to deed transfer, is that values are still pretty good. Valuations are high. This deed transfer revenue is not just because there are more sales. It's also because there are higher prices. So we have a vibrant real estate market. The question is going to be, as we move forward, is how many people are now going to file appeals of their assessed valuation because of the loss of revenue, because their rents are down in commercial structures. That's something that I think we're going to have to wait and see. Early indication is that we haven't seen that many. I mean, I read an article in local media recently that we had fewer assessment appeals than we might have expected. Still assessment appeals, but not as many as we thought. So as we're projecting out into the future, the real estate market and the real estate tax revenue may not be as impacted as we once thought. So that's something that we're going to keep our eye on this year and moving forward, and we'll have more to say about in the future. I'll close by just saying that it's been a challenging year. Maybe city of Pittsburgh, I think maybe we got through the storm a little better than a lot of other cities, just because of the diversity of our economy, because of the our focus here in Pittsburgh on research and on healthcare and education really helped us continue to have significant employment in the city, even in the time of a pandemic. So I'm going to stop there and open up for questions. I'm sure you have them. Again, I want to thank Rachel and the accounting staff for doing really a great job on this report, and for the first time, doing it under such difficult circumstances as not being able to be here to do the work. So I'll close and take questions.
I see we have a question from Ashley Murray. Ashley, if you can type your question, that would be terrific. I don't think we have the ability to allow her to do audio. Ashley Murray would like Controller Lamb to please elaborate on the debt figures.
Elaborate on the debt figures? So, and you want to pull that slide up? So long-term debt. Two things I would say about debt. Obviously, debt is on the rise again because we are back in a position where we're able to borrow. Capital debt's important. We need to be able to borrow for capital financing and for infrastructure projects. The whole idea around a capital financing is that you're financing something that's going to last long. And so if you are using capital dollars to fund a bridge project, then you want the taxpayers today and the taxpayers 40 years from now who are using that bridge to pay for it. So you spread the cost of that asset through the life of the asset, and so borrowing now allows us to spread the cost of those assets, those new assets, those improved assets throughout the life of those assets. So that's why you see now an increase in borrowing, because coming out of Act 47, we weren't in a position to borrow. We weren't, our credit rating, our bond rating is in a much more positive place than it was. So it enables us to borrow at less cost. So that's why you see the increase in debt over the last couple of years. I would say that that's a responsible thing to do. I would also tell you that we've seen a significant drop in the service of our debt. So the annual payment that we're making to debt service still remains significantly below 12% of the budget, which is our goal. And that even with this increased debt, that continues to be the case. I would also say that as you see, when you think about in the past, where we were making debt service payments, of 60, 70, $80 million a year. We're not in that category anymore. We have a much more responsible debt payment schedule now. And the other thing is that in 2020, we saw a refinance of debt. Did we do that? We did that in 2021. So just earlier this year, we refinanced debt that will actually lower, at least for the next few years, lower our debt service payments. The downside of that is that it increases our costs down the road, but still in a responsible way. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but hopefully it does.
Chris Potter has two questions. I'll start with his first one. You noted solid performance on deed transfer tax. Does that mean your concerns a few years ago about raising the tax to pay for affordable housing have not borne out?
I'll tell you, I can admit when I'm wrong. And I really believe that the increase to deed transfer tax would have a stifling effect on sales. That hasn't happened in the big picture. I would tell you, though, that when you see what's driving deed transfer revenue right now, it's big sales. It's commercial properties. It's buildings. It's multifamily structures. I would still make the argument that for the single-family homeowner, the ordinary homeowner who can't afford lawyers to fight over 5% taxes, that there has been an effect there, and because I think we've seen that there have been fewer of those sales. The good news for the city is that all across the country there is just a big pickup in home buying, and so we're benefiting from that, despite the fact that we have the most onerous deed transfer tax, certainly in the state and probably maybe in the country. And so it's I would tell you that I'm surprised that we've seen this increase in revenue with this, given the increase in the tax. But I would still say that for the ordinary homeowner, that it's been problematic.
The second question from Chris Potter: could you expand on your thoughts about yesterday's One Pittsburgh deal? You note that the money will not be going to the city, which I think was always the mayor's plan. Is that your main objection, or do you have concerns about the sums involved as well?
Well, I would say this. When I only know what I've read through the press release and what I've seen in the media. So I haven't been getting any kind of briefing on this program and didn't know anything about it until I heard about it yesterday afternoon. But for the past 8 years, our large nonprofits have done very good things in our community around issues like the social determinants of health, pre-K, education, beyond pre-K. There have been announcements about affordable housing. There's been, a lot of the work that they do as part of their civic contribution to this city that's happened over the last 8 years. According to yesterday's announcement, those things are going to continue. But what's also happened over the last 8 years is that these organizations have not made or have not entered into with the city a payment in lieu of tax arrangement. And according to yesterday's announcement, that's going to continue as well. There will be no payment in lieu of taxes. So the significant costs that city taxpayers pay to make sure that these large nonprofits and their significant real estate holdings are protected through our public safety apparatus, that they have streets and storm sewers and street trees and everything else that the city does for all of its residents and businesses, they will continue to get that benefit and not pay for it. Now, some of them do pay some, and I appreciate that. That some of them are in leased space, and that helps. I appreciate that some of them have parking and other taxable initiatives that help us. But the fact is, they are very big property owners. They don't pay the property tax, and we should have a payment in lieu of agreement in place. And according to yesterday's, that's not coming. That's not going to happen. I don't think it's fair. I think it's particularly unfair to the city taxpayers who continue to bear the burden of this government.
anyone has any other questions, if you could type them into the Q&A feature.
Okay, listen, I am available. I mean, most of you have Rachel's contact, or you have my cell. If you have questions beyond what we discussed today, or anything more in depth on what we presented today, please feel free to contact me. To people viewing this, I hope it's been informative, and you as well. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us in the City Controller's office, and we will make ourselves available. So thanks very much for paying some attention. Thanks to everybody and thanks for the folks here at IMP for hosting us today and putting this event together for us. So thank you very much.